All right, let's go ahead and try. There we go. Okay, hopefully, I think we're back in action. All right, so we're covering muckrakers today. So let's go ahead and start off with that definition of muckrakers. These were journalists who expose the need of reforms. Journalists who expose the need of reforms, such as political and economic corruption. Such as political and economic corruption and social hardships. Political and economic corruption and social hardships to the American public. And then we've got our 4 individuals, 3 of them, which we'll get to today. Make sure you have your highlighting. So as we talk about each of these individuals, you need to be taking notes on them. You can go ahead and click and add underneath of them and type into the notes if you want to do it that way. Or if you're someone who prefers the comment method off to the side, you may do that as well, but make sure that you're taking notes. All right, the term muckraker got coined by President Roosevelt. Teddy Roosevelt said that those who rake in the muck, and then the term muckraker kind of came about, are people who are doing investigative reporting, many of them doing it undercover. So this was something that Americans especially like at this point in time, learning something that they didn't know, or learning more about something, and the fact that the writer is doing it firsthand and experiencing it firsthand versus just hearing somebody else's side is what the public wants. And so once a journalist did an expose, they would break it out into segments so that each day the new person would have to go and buy the newspaper for the next article so that they could get the whole expose, that they could read it. So this is Nellie Bly, one of my favorites. Nellie Bly started out, and that's not her real name, that's her pen name. A lot of them, because they traveled in circles, didn't want people to just know them because of their writing ability. So many would have their normal name and then have their pen name. She starts out in Pittsburgh and eventually will make her way to New York City, where she gets offered a job by Joseph Pulitzer, who, remember, is in charge of the New York World, one of the largest newspaper circulations in the world at the time. So, of course, when she offers this job, she's going to take it regardless. But he's getting some reports that there might be, some situations still looking into on Blackwell Island, which is where the insane asylum is, a jail, and a poorhouse. And so he wants Nellie Bly to convince people that she's insane, get taken to the insane asylum, and then report her findings, which she agrees to without question because she wants to be in Pulitzer's paper, make a name for herself. He tells her, I don't know how you're going to get in there, but that's up to you. And then finally, towards the end, she's like, how exactly am I going to get out of the institution if I get myself in? And he's like, I really don't know, but I'll make sure I get you out. So, I mean, that's very brave, or just, wanted to be in that paper regardless that you would risk being in the asylum for the rest of your life because a man who's been your boss for 2 seconds says that he's going to get you out. Bly only knew 2 ways to get into an asylum. One was to convince 2 doctors that you were insane, which this was kind of, at least that was in the state of New York. Some states had put that into play to make sure that if you were trying to get rid of your rich relative and just wanted to get him out of the way and send him to an asylum, you had to convince 2 doctors to do that. Yeah, so it made it a little harder for you to take your aunt's money or a family member's money. because people like that exist. And then the second way was to get a court to put you in the insane asylum. So instead of trying to take her, pretend to be, insane in front of her friends and put them all through that, she just thought she'd go the second route, getting the court to put her in the insane asylum. So she pretends to be an immigrant, Nellie Brown, goes and rents a room in a boarding house. So kind of place where, single women could rent in a working class neighborhood. And she proceeds to act insane, or at least what she thinks an insane person is. You have to keep in mind, we probably have a better idea of what it means to be insane than they did back then, because we've seen movies and things like that. So I'd be curious on what exactly her performance looked like. She says that she practiced making her insane faces before she went to the boarding home, trying to make her face look like it was doing things that she wasn't wanting it to do. Once she got there, she immediately starts kind of like yelling and talking about how she don't trust some of the boarders. She tried to look crazy. She would go outside in the middle of the night and like just yell. And so the women there, of course, are on edge, and the owner's like, okay, we can't be having this. And so they summoned the police in the morning. They take her before a judge. Judge just thinks maybe she's been drugged. And so they take her to the hospital. At the hospital, two separate doctors say, one says she's insane, and one says she's so insane she's probably incurable. So apparently her performance was quite the, Oscar-winning one. And she's sent to Blackwell Island, where at Blackwell, she immediately starts acting normal. She's like, if I've convinced already, two doctors from a hospital that I'm insane, maybe I'm doing too good of a job, because she doesn't want to end up like in a padded room alone. I mean, that defeats the purpose. She wants to be in the general population where she can have access to speak to people, because she's only going to be there for a short time, and she wants to make sure that she gets the story and enough information. Well, when she starts acting normal, the doctors at the institution are convinced that she's even more insane than the previous doctors thought, which really shows you the level of doctoring and medical competency at that particular point in time. I'm going to read just a short little paragraph excerpt of a summary of some of the stuff that she experienced. Her expose goes into these different things very in detail, because again, she's trying to sell newspapers, so she wants to be very thorough. But this is just kind of a little summary. What, except torture, would produce insanity quicker than this treatment? Here is a class of women sent to be cured, which is true. A lot of women who end up in insane asylums are not actually insane. They have been sent by relatives to get cured. A lot of mental health things that we know exist today, like depression, there's not a term for it back in the 1800s. And so if a woman didn't act her normal self, wasn't as happy, looked like, they would send them to the asylum hoping that they would seek treatment. And so there are several women there that were, had a little bit of depression, but after seeking this treatment, she's like, well, no wonder these people have ever left, because it'll break anybody. I would like the expert physicians who are condemning me for my actions, which have proven their ability. Proven their ability basically says these guys aren't worth anything, because obviously if I've gotten in here and convinced, more than 4 doctors that I'm insane, obviously these doctors don't know anything. To take a perfectly sane and healthy woman, shut her up and make her sit from 6 a.m. to 6 p.m. on straight back benches. Do not allow her to talk or move for those hours. Give her no reading and let her know nothing of the world or what's its doings. Give her bad food, harsh treatment, and see how long it will take to make her insane. 2 months would make anybody mentally and physically weak. So just saying that, she came in as a perfectly healthy person, but she's just, in the short time that she's there, she feels like she's starting to physically and mentally break down. So these poor people who are coming in here hoping to seek treatment, well, no wonder they never got any better, because how can you? She really talks about a lot about the food. She talks about how stale it is, how moldy it is, the bad cuts of beef. Even I think the bread one is probably one of the more disgusting ones. They talked about how it was bread dough, but instead of cooking it, they just left it out to dry. ugh. And then the water, how the water is undrinkable. So it's not good. Now, one of the reasons for the poor food is two, depending on the asylum. Some asylums don't have the budget. The state gives them money, and they don't have the budget for the food because, like at Blackwell, they were supposed to have 1,000 people there. Well, Blackwell had over 1,600 people there, so they don't have the money to put good food in front of them. And then some asylums and institutions were pocketing the rest. They had the money to give people better food, but instead they gave them this gruel and this stale and this low cuts of beef, and then they would pocket the rest, which that's going to be exposed during some other people's investigations as well, and those people will be prosecuted. So she's only there for 10 days. After 10 days, Pulitzer comes and gets her out. So eventually all of her articles would be published into a small book called 10 Days in a Madhouse. And kind of really shows the level. She talked about the ice cold baths. Her clothes were taken from her, and she was given kind of this like very basic linen burlap sack situation. And she realizes that, like, how could people not know about this? Well, she experiences firsthand this verbal and physical abuse when, and the places put in new rules to keep this debauchery, a secret. At Blackwell, you had to write 48 hours in advance of your arrival of seeing a loved one. So, and this was pretty much standard procedure across any institution. Some of them required 72, some of them required a 2-week notice where you would go in and they would be able to put that person in their original nice clothes. They would do their hair, give them better nutrition for those days. And then they are verbally threatened. Like, if you tell anybody what's going on, they're going to leave and we're going to beat you, which happened all the time. And there were no visits that were unsupervised. There was always an employee in the room. So no one could ever say anything like, hey, I'm being beaten, or hey, I haven't had a meal, or hey, they take my clothes from me. They can't say anything. Because obviously if they do, the employee is going to say, well, she's having a bad day. Obviously she's crazy, and, it's not going to help their cause. So I can't even imagine, having the few people that do have loved ones that have the ability to come and visit and not being able to say anything, how that would just mentally destroy you by far. So when she writes her expose, a grand jury does get involved and they head to Blackwell. But Blackwell, as soon as her stuff is put in the papers, they know what's up. They start, cleaning and putting the residents in their normal clothes because they're expecting a visit. And when the grand jury comes, everything just looks a little too good, especially even based on reports that they had of other pop-ins. They weren't pop-ins. Most places didn't have any scheduled visits from the state, and if they did, they were scheduled. They believe Nellie Bly, for her to put herself in this position that she experienced it firsthand made a big difference. She didn't hear it from someone who was at Blackwell. She was at Blackwell. And, Blackwell tried to say, well, she was there and made up all these lies to sell newspapers. Many thought, well, no, because she'd know we'd come and investigate that you guys are doing this stuff. And she's a little too detailed. It didn't add up. This seems right. And eventually the other residents will start talking to the grand jury with protections. There have been a few people who have been pulled out by their families, and rightly so. And those people finally spoke up. So eventually they do believe Bly, and there's some major overhauls. It's not in the state of New York, but other places. Because people are outraged when her story starts making it to other newspapers across the country. Because there are good people who wanted their relatives to get better, and then to find out that if this happened at this one, and it didn't say that happened at every, but there was always some level. You always had at least one guy in there that was, he was beating people behind the backs and that type of thing. To think that, oh my gosh, that's why my sister's been there for 20 years and she never got better because she's mentally broken because of what these people have did. It's heartbreaking to people. And so kind of a major overhaul. You no longer have to have written warning. You can, as long as it's visiting hours, you can show up and see your relative at any point in time, because they want this ability of popping in, because that keeps people accountable. And now states do scheduled visits and they do pop-ins. as well. Same thing like with nursing homes today. Those laws are in there to protect them, and it comes from places like this with Nellie Bly's reporting. Nellie Bly will kind of be famous in the New York, New England area. She'll become nationally, almost worldwide famous when she travels the world. If you've heard of the Jules Verne book, Around the World in 80 Days, well, she wants to see if she can do it in 80 days and beat it, and she does. She does it in a little more than 72 days, which was shocking for a woman. Most people, people were taking bets with family and whatnot. Most people thought between 100 and 120 days because she was a woman. And you could follow her journey, track her in the newspaper. They had maps once in a while of, her route. And so it was kind of something, hey, I want to buy the newspaper to see what Nellie Bly wrote about this week or what she wrote about this week. And so, again, that was kind of a national-wide story. She'll eventually get married, focus on her husband's industry. He dies. She tries to pay off his debts, and she'll eventually go back to reporting during World War I. As you can imagine, it was hard to get journalists that weren't being drafted or volunteering for the war. So a woman, of course, made the best sense. And Nellie Bly could get a lot of stories because some guys weren't willing to open up about what the horrors that they're experiencing in war to a woman, a regular woman. But hey, I'll tell Nellie Bly my story. And so she was able to get a lot of good detail about what was happening on the front. And that is our Nellie Bly. All right, your next person on your notes is Ida Tarbell. She goes more after corruption business-wise. Nellie liked the personal stories. She'll sneak into a sweatshop. She'll investigate a jail. So she likes that kind of more personal plight of people, where Ida's going to go ahead and focus on corruption. And her big story that makes her famous is her expose on Standard Oil. At this point in time, we have laws in place that make monopolies, that means one person controlling everything, illegal. The problem is Standard Oil, the largest monopoly in the nation, has somehow managed to still stay together. And so she poses as a secretary, which she's very good at because she's college educated, so she can type better than anybody else. Her grammar and skills kind of move her up the secretary echelon in the company of Standard Oil, where she's eventually given some access to documents, some of them which she's supposed to dispose of. And she's able to kind of get the workings of how Standard Oil is still together after all of this time, and starts writing her expose, which really puts Standard Oil kind of in the light. Federal government, because of her article, realizes that, okay, this does look bad. Our largest monopoly in the country. Here we're worrying about all these little dinky guys over here, and Standard Oil still exists. No one's taking the government seriously. And we'll start breaking her up. And one of the reasons is because a lot of these guys who have overlooked Standard Oil was because Rockefeller was given pocket money to these people. So they wanted to make sure that they could disband this as much as possible before people started to really investigate all of the illegal stuff some of the senators and other wealthy people had been doing to keep Standard Oil together. So the federal government finally made Standard Oil officially break up into multiple companies. And with that, finally, America had competition in the oil market again, and the price of oil dramatically drops for the first time in more than a decade because of Rockefeller no longer having a monopoly. So again, without showing all of the shadiness that was going on, people, okay, there's still a monopoly, but never really kind of knew why until she exposes the truth with the amount of corruption. So that was her probably largest corruption piece that she became well known for. And then your number 3, make sure that you add Jacob Riis. He is focusing on social plight of those living inside of tenements and slums. He not only gives a lot of great detail in his writing, but he documents it using pictures. I don't have a picture of him for some reason, so that's not him. So let's go back to Muckrakers. with his book, How the Other Half Lives. So, as we learned in our previous chapter, a lot of what you guys know about slums, you really got to see firsthand with those pictures. You know, me telling you that it was overcrowded, me telling you this was one thing, but you guys getting to see all of the different levels of what tenements existed in slums gave you probably the best picture. And so, the amount of pictures that are included in his book, How the Other Half Live, really show Americans who don't live in a slum or live near a slum really what that means to the immigrant community. I'm just going to read two short little paragraphs. One talks about the hotels. They're not really hotels. Usually are there like boarding rooms, but they don't even get a room. You get a section, and they're very expensive. And so they had some great imagery, which I'll read because, again, it's just a paragraph. A 25-cent lodging house keeps up the pretense of a bedroom through its high head partition, enclosing a space just large enough to hold a cot and a chair and allow a man to pull off his clothes in the shallowest of pretenses. So for 25 cents, which was a lot of money back then, you didn't even get a whole room. You got a little partition, which is a little screen, a bed, and a chair. So you got like a 5 by 10 little chunk of a room for privacy for 25 cents. But it was better than being on the street. The 15-cent bed stands boldly forth without screens in a room full of bunks, with sheets as yellow and blankets as foul. A 10-cent level locker for the sleepers' clothes disappeared at this level. They no longer needed it. Their financial level was so low they had nothing to lock up and save on general principle alone. Usually the 10-cent and 7-cent lodgings were different grades of the same abomination. Or by a lucky stroke of beggary, this had exchanged the lot for shelter of the floor of one of these hotels. So sometimes it was so crowded, or sometimes they didn't have the number of beds, that people had to pay 7 cents to sleep on the floor of these filthy places, because that was better than sleeping out in the cold and on the streets. So definitely kind of probably a different point. We really haven't talked about what individuals, we've kind of been focusing on families. So how and what those lodgings look like. And then one of the many descriptions of what it looked like in a house here, he talks about kind of the overcrowding. Look into any of these houses, everywhere, the same pile of rags, the musty paper, all of which the sanitary police flatter themselves with the banishment to the dumpsters and the warehouses. In this flatter parlor, truly the bed is all the room is for. The family tea kettle's on the stove, doing duty for the time as a wash boiler. By night, it will return to its proper use again, and the poverty will make both ends meet. 1, 2, 3 beds are there, and if those old boxes with heaps of foul straw can be called a bed name, a broken stove with crazy pipes that smoke leaks from every joint, and the rough boards propped up on the boxes, piles of rubbish in the corner, the closeness and the smell are appalling. How many people sleep here? The woman with the red bandana shakes her head sullenly, but the bare-legged girl with the bright face counts her fingers. 5, 6, 6, sir. And that's 5 children. So 11 people in this room. So again, kind of, he would have a picture of this overcrowded, people shoved in a room in these conditions, and then he'd have that word description as well. So that kind of two-tone with his book made it very popular. And again, it was kind of one of the first major documentations photographically of the slums, which kind of made him have a name for himself for sure. Monday we'll do Upton Sinclair. He's probably one of the most well-known muckrakers for his book. And I read about 2 pages of his book because the description of what's going on, and he focuses on Chicago, which we really haven't talked about Chicago all that much. And so it's a little bit different viewpoint here in the Midwest.